Okay, guys, we're going to get started. So typically what I do, this will happen pretty much for the rest of the semester, is take a look at the work that was turned in. So what I'm looking at right now is, so this is week 4. You guys turned in week 2 last week. I graded it, and so this is the first chance we have to look at it. But I do want to look at some things here, just to sort of go over what's happening, talk about a couple of things that I was spotting. If I show your work, do not feel like I'm picking on you or whatever. It's just that a lot of times we have common problems, and it's basically the first person that I hit who has that problem, whatever, that's the file that I show. That puts, that means the people who's come alphabetically early are usually, you'll feel like you're more picked on than the people who are at the end of the alphabet. So Jared, I'm going to apologize right off the bat because you're the first person that I see in the grading part. So I'm not picking on you. It's just where you fall in the, if you change your name or tell me you want to be called Zebra at the end of all of this, then I'll probably never get to you. So. Exactly. It's complicated. But anyway, I'm just saying I'm not picking on anybody. I'm not calling anybody out. It's not, that has got nothing to do with it. These are mistakes that are like commonly happening. So I just wanted to sort of point that out. Okay, I'm not going to do that part. Okay, this, we'll just start in. So this is the first thing that comes up, and I need everybody to pay attention to this part. Hang on one second, let me get my Photoshop correct. Sorry, give me one sec. Okay. This happened to, I'd say, at least a third of you. So this warning comes up, and it says that there's an embedded profile mismatch. And what it's saying is that the embedded profile is display P3. Some of them will say D3 anyway. And then the working space that we've got set up in Photoshop is Adobe RGB 1998. What do you want to do? So in this case, it's not the end of the world to say use the embedded profile instead. This is a display profile. Now again, this is not the profile that we assign inside of Camera Raw. This is the working space that this raw data is in, and it's a mismatch. And so at any rate, the reason that I'm bringing this part up here is, are you bringing this stuff in from Lightroom?
No.
So you just have, you just open the file?
I switched my Photoshop profile last class.
Okay. So it was in the color settings part of it all?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to show everybody where this is. I'm going to go ahead and open it up because it's not the end of the world, but nonetheless, I need everybody to check this right now, please. Go up to your edit menu. This will be for both Windows and for Mac people. If you click on the edit menu and you come down to the bottom to color settings, you want to make sure that you've got this North American Pre-Press 2 set, not the North American General Purpose 2, which will give you sRGB in that color space, but North American Pre-Press 2. If you click on this drop down, you'll see that there's a bunch of different profiles that you could actually use in here. You could do ProPhoto RGB if you knew what you were doing. I do not suggest doing that. But at any rate, that's what's actually happening here. It's a mismatch, and this is set up in the settings, and this will apply to everything. However, at least in my case, because I've got it set up, it's also got these preserve embedded profiles. All the color management policies will say preserve them all, but it'll also say if there's any mismatch happening in here, when it opens up, ask what's going on. So this will be your first clue that something is actually, that there's a problem here. Unfortunately, the default, if you go to General Purpose 2, this is how Photoshop ships, they turn all of these warnings off. So I have no idea. I think Adobe, the reason this is all happening is Adobe is slightly in bed with Microsoft. This whole sRGB as a preferred color space is something that Microsoft, well, it was Microsoft, it was Hewlett Packard, it was Adobe. A bunch of people got together years ago and decided that the color space of the web should be sRGB. And since they don't think about printing stuff out, this became the de facto. But at any rate, so just make sure that that prepress is on there and that your Adobe RGB is selected. And then we're still going to get this mismatch. If you look at the very bottom of your screen, so sort of at the very bottom part, right next to the zoom percentage, there is a space that will give you a piece of information, and there's also an arrow that points to the right. If you click on that arrow, you'll get a fly-up menu, and you can actually change this to show you different information that's going on about your file. And so for me, I always set this as document profile because that way I can always see what's going on here. Again, in all of my cases, this will read Adobe RGB. If you get this display P3 or if you get sRGB, whatever, you know that there's some issue and it'll give you a warning. The other thing to notice about Jared's file right here is this up at the very top. And you'll see that the title happens up at the very top. And then in parentheses, it will actually have the layer that's selected. But the more important part is that right next to it, it'll give you RGB, or if your file is in a different color space, if your file is a CMYK file, this will say CMYK. If it's an LAB file, it'll say LAB. But then there's a /, and then in Jared's case, there's a 16. This is telling me he is working in 16-bit in this file. So 16-bit is not a problem. 16-bit is twice the amount of data to describe this color space as 8-bit is. So unfortunately, it's also twice the space. So Jared's file is twice the size as it really needs to be. That's not the worst thing in the world. Having less space or less data to describe your space is far more problematic than having too much. So, but I just wanted to point this out here because it's not only twice the file size, but any process that you do on it is also going to take twice as long. So if you run a filter that takes 2 minutes on an 8-bit file, it's going to take 4 minutes on a 16-bit file because it's got to do the same thing to twice the amount of data. Make sense? Yes? Right. So hang on one second. So you're up here in the edit menu down here to color settings, right? Yeah. And then it's easiest just to pick the can set. So if you pick North American Prepress, what do you get?
Oh, I have that, but just when I'm exiting out, I press OK or save on the right.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No, what the save part about it is, so you can go in and customize this thing. You could go in and say, you know, I want all the settings, this part here, but so here, watch, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to change this and say, well, I really prefer to work in ProPhoto RGB. And I'm going to click on this, and immediately this setting is going to change to custom. If you click on save, then you'll actually be able to name it with something that would matter to you so that you know, let's say you were going to just name it after yourself. This is, you know, your color space. That's all that's going on here. So, all right. So at any rate, realize that part's going on about the whole 16-bit as well. Again, it's working in Adobe RGB. This is a little bit overkill, but if you choose to work in ProPhoto RGB, ProPhoto RGB is this gigantic color space, and you have to work in 16-bit. The reason you have to work in 16-bit in that ProPhoto color space is, well, here, take a look at this really quickly. Everybody can do this with me. If you're on a Mac, you don't have this on a PC. But if you're on a Mac, go to your Applications folder, go all the way down to the bottom to the Utilities folder. Then we're going to go to the the Color Sync utility, and double-click to open that up. In the System drop-down thing on the side, make sure that in the tab that runs along the top that you've got the second of the tabs, the one that just says Profile, not Profile First Aid, but Profile. Click open your system, and in your system you should be able to find an Adobe RGB. And if you actually don't do Adobe RGB, let me see, you may not have this on your computer. I'm going to open up and take a look where mine is. If you open up, then again, and not everybody's going to have all of these same drop downs. It all has to do with the number of profiles that you have actually loaded over the years. So if I drop down my computer one, I'm also not going to get it here. I'm going to drop down my user one, and I'm not going to get it there. So I'm going to go to other, and hopefully it's in there. Where are you?
How would you get from 8-bit or 16-bit back to 8-bit?
I'll show you, and I'll show you kind of where it's probably coming from as well. So anyway, it's actually in the very bottom part down. It's in Other. If you open it up, this is where mine is anyway. There's another folder in there called, it's library / application support / and I'm going to guess that's an Adobe after it. Yep, Adobe Color Profiles recommended. You'll see that inside that there is a ProPhoto RGB. So I'm going to click on that. This is the ProPhoto RGB color space, and you can see it's gigantic here. I'm going to get my screen as open as I can. You can't even see the entire thing inside of the window here. That's how big it is. But to give you some comparison, if you go up to the top left-hand corner, there's a little drop-down arrow. If you click on that drop-down arrow, you can say, hold this for comparison, and you'll see it sort of ghosts out that color space and then go all the way up to the very top of your window, back to your system, and click on Adobe RGB. And what this is showing you is how much larger the ghosting is, the ProPhoto RGB color space, and the Adobe RGB color space is sitting here inside of it. And you can see it's gigantic. It's gigantic relative to that. And so what happens is that to actually describe all of the colors inside the Adobe RGB color space, 8-bit is enough. That gives you 16.7 million colors to actually describe the space. But if you use that same 8 bits to describe ProPhoto RGB, what happens is that the colors no longer are next to one another. In order to describe it, because you have such limited data, it can only describe colors that are pretty significantly far away from their next closest color. And so you end up getting banding in your image because the colors are too far apart from one another. You don't get continuous tone anymore. That's basically why we're dealing with this whole issue. It's a really important one. So again, 16-bit will describe either of these spaces just fine, but you need to have 16-bit if you're going to go with ProPhoto RGB. Going back to Photoshop to answer Jared's question, if you wanted to change this right now, I think what's happening here, if you double click on your first smart object to go back into Camera Raw, inside of Camera Raw, you can see right down here in your display setting, you've got this set up. In your settings in Camera Raw, you've got it set up to open in 16-bit, also probably in this display format. So if you go up to the little gear and you click on that, in the I'll get there eventually. In the workflow part right here, this is where it's a mismatch has been also set up. In terms of the color space, you would want to change that to Adobe RGB. And in terms of the bit depth, you would also want to change that to 8 bits per channel. And then say OK. So in this case, the default is set up here right now. I don't think, though, if I open this, it's going to actually change that color space. We'll see, because you've got two other smart objects in here who are still in that. Yeah, it's still staying in 16-bit. So the other option that you've got once you get a file into Photoshop, if you need to change it, is you come up to the image menu down to mode. And inside of mode, you can change your bit depth. So image mode down to 8-bit. And this will change it for everybody. You'll see if I'll do it for yours. You'll see you'll get a warning here about doing this with smart objects. Oh, it just said preparing smart objects. Usually you get a warning here telling you that they don't like the idea of doing this to a smart object. But anyway, now you can see that there's an 8 next to that RGB. So this is now in 8-bit. It's still in that display P3, but at least it's in an 8-bit image right here. So anyway, I just wanted to point that part out. The next thing I want to point out, I'm going to double click on this to open this up, and this happened to a lot of you as well. In this case, hang on one second. because I don't know what else I've changed here when I actually did that part. And I want to go back to your original file. So I just closed it without saving it. I'm going to open it right up again. I'm going to double click on the smart object. This brings me into Camera Raw, and this was the next thing that probably more than half of you did. I've got this warning right next to my color profile, and if you hover over it, it says the profile is not installed. The rendering is incorrect. Again, we had this conversation. What has happened is Jared made the profile on his computer and installed it in the system on his computer, and that's all fine. So as long as he works on this file on his computer, if he opens up this very same file right now on his computer, it will be fine because the profile is in his system. But his profile is not on my system. So when I open it up, I get this telling me that the profile doesn't exist on my system, and that therefore there is a color rendering mismatch here, and the color is wrong. So that's why we have to go through that whole process of creating a new DNG as the beginning of this image that we want to work on. We're going to do this today, so don't worry about it. But if you do it that way, you can actually then create and embed a DNG profile into the base image. And then if that becomes the starting point of your Photoshop file, because it's a DNG, that profile gets embedded into the DNG, and it will go anywhere. It'll go to anybody's computer. It doesn't matter. You don't need to have that profile installed in your system because it's in the file. Unfortunately, unless you do the DNG as a base, there's no way to actually do that because you can't embed a profile in a raw file other than a DNG. Make sense? I should tell you about this. So what software can you use to edit a DNG or a raw file? Just a raw file. So how many people in here are Canon? How many people are Nikon? Sony? Okay, so this doesn't matter whether you're CR2 an NEF or is it Sony's ARC, ACR, ARW. It doesn't matter how. What software can you use to edit those files? Photoshop, Lightroom. Is that it? Oh no. Well, anyway, truth be told, none of them will edit a raw file. By definition, if you actually get inside of a raw file and truly edit the raw file, it will implode. So what happened is, years and years ago, Adobe came out with TIFF, which is a tagged information file format. That's all it is. It's a digital file that's got tagged information on it. Everybody, every single person in the world who has a raw file format, it's based on TIFF. As a matter of fact, they're all licensed from Adobe. So every time you take a picture with your camera, a piece of the original price of that camera goes to Adobe. So you think you make a lot of money on it. Adobe's making a fortune off of stuff behind the scenes that you don't even know about. However, they ran into a problem, and so they were trying to so they'd come out with this file format. They wanted to get it adopted, and law enforcement came to them and said, absolutely not. We will not touch this. There's no way we can assure that somebody hasn't tampered with this file. So we can't use it for evidence. We can't shoot pictures with it. That's simply not going to happen. We're not going to adopt this. So Adobe re-engineered the file and came back to them and said, if anybody goes in and touches anything inside this file, the file will explode. And basically, it'll die. You won't be able to open it. So there is no software that can actually, you can process a file, process raw files till you're blue in the face, but you cannot edit the raw file itself. That is sacrosanct. DNG is a hybrid of that. So DNG actually has the raw data inside, but it also has, DNG is really more of a container. So it's more of you take a raw file, you put it inside, more like a folder, and then you can also put in the XMP data into that, which is describing how you want to process the file. So it appears to you to be a single file, but the truth of it is there's multiple files that are actually inside that DNG container. And that's how they get around it. That's how you can embed a profile in there. You're not really putting it in the raw data as much as you're associating it with. And it goes along with, because again, you see it as just a single file. Does that sort of make sense? Does everybody in here know what an XMP file is? Yes?
I actually have a question. So
Shoot.
Sometimes when I would save my DNG, I would look back at
Yes.
Is that an issue at all?
No, not at all, not at all. The XMP file is only impacting the original raw file that started it. So here, let's try this really quickly just to show, again, this is one of those things where if you understand the process, you don't have to memorize the process. So even though this is a tangent and not really something I wanted to talk about today, I think this part is important. So let's go back to, class number 2, session number 2 for you guys. And let's go to inside your session number 2. You should have a folder that says 201003277_ver_woods_07. If you can open that up. I do have an XMP. I've got 2 XMP files in here. I'm going to throw both of them away. Do you guys have XMP files in that folder? Yeah. Throw them both away, please. All right, so everybody found this folder, right? I'm going to start just with a single one. It's the CR2 file that is the frame number 001. So they all have the exact same number, but it's the one that says 001. Not the enhanced, not the DNG, not all of that. Do you guys have enhanced DNGs in here as well? You can throw those away too. You don't need them. So anyway, it's just the CR2 file, the one that's frame 001. You can see there's a color card inside of it. If you double click that and open it up, this is exactly what I was talking about. This is the issue that we've got here. This is a raw file. You cannot edit this data. I can process it to death, but I cannot edit it. So I'm going to actually take the exposure here, and I'm going to drop it down to a -5, and I'm going to say done. And as soon as that happens, if you go back in to where that folder is, hang on one second, I got something that's not happy here. If you go back into that folder, you'll see that there's actually this thing that says it's an XMP. It's got the exact same name, but the extension on the end is .xmp. This is actually a text file that describes what you did to your image. And so the 2 of them together, if you double click again, sorry, not the Photoshop file. If you double click on that CR2 file again, you come up, you'll see that it remembers that it was a -5. Well, that -5 memory is really in the XMP file. Again, you cannot change, you cannot edit a raw file. So I'm going to hit cancel out of here. It is simply a text file that describes how you want your file processed. So if you right click or control click on that text file, you want to open it in a text editor. So I'm going to control click on mine and say open with. And I do not want to open it in Photos. I'm going to go to Other. And I'm going to just pick a text editor. So in my Applications folder, again, if you're on a Mac, we are just going to go down to Text Edit. It's the most basic of the text editors that comes with Apple. It's really fast, though. So Text Edit, and I'm going to say Open. And what you see is just a list of the XMP data. So this is all the XMP data about this file, everything that's going on. It knows the file, the Canon, the thing, the exposure, the camera model that it was. It knows the orientation, that's whether I was horizontal or vertical. It tells me that my exposure time was 1/200th of a second, that my F number was, they're calling this a 10/1. I don't know what that really means. But anyway, it's all this stuff about it. As you continue to go down this XMP, this data set in here, you'll come down, there's a series in here that says it's a CRS. This is camera raw settings. And you'll notice in here in CRS, you've got, in my case, I've got for exposure, I've got a -5. I'm going to change that. I'm going to get rid of the minus. And then I'm going to save this file and close it up. And then I'm going to double click on my CR2 file again. And you can see that it comes in now as 5 stops overexposed. So what that XMP data is, what it's doing is it's recording all the changes that you make in here so that when you open this file, it knows that that's what you were actually doing. That's how you actually processed it. It's the recipe. Does that sort of make sense? Anyway, but so what a DNG does is that a DNG, you can cancel. Yes. Sure. First off, let me get rid of this one first, just so you can see what happens. I'm going to throw this XMP away. I'm going to empty my trash. And I'm going to double click on the CR2 again. And you'll notice that I don't have either 5-stop over or 5-stop under because that process of it has been pitched. So I said originally I just took the, so have you got the raw file open in Camera Raw? Yes? Okay. Just drag the exposure slider to a -5. We can do any changes in here, but I just put it at a -5. And then just click on Done. You don't need to open this file up because it'll write the XMP file for you. And then if we go look at the right next to where that thing was, you'll see the XMP file is going to come up here in a second. Here it is right here. So again, it's the same name as the file, except it's got a .xmp extension on it as opposed to the .cr2. And you need to open this in a text editor. You can open it in Word, you can open it in Pages, you can open it. I've just got a program on my Macintosh that's called Text Edit. It comes with all Macs. And if I come over here, I can just drop it on my text editor and it'll open it up. So do you have it open in a text editor yet? All right, so that's your XMP data right there. Mm-hmm. You need to control click on that. No, that's a command click. Oh. Control click and say open with, and say other. And you're in your applications folder. You need to go down to text edit, or you can do Word. You had Word up there as well. Go up higher. Yeah, just do Word. Here, click on your drop-down menu right here. Let's go to name, and then click on that drop-down menu, and let's do columns, and then just scroll down. And you're going to go down to text edit and just click on text edit and say open. And this is the whole list of everything about how that file was processed. If you make the window larger and scroll down, you get into the CRSs. These are the controls right here, and you can see up here at the top. This goes through exactly the stuff from the very top. See that -5 right there?
Yeah.
It's remembering that you did a -5. Just get rid of the minus. And when you do that, and then save the file, when you do that, it's going to, what you're now telling it is that you don't want to go 5 stops underexposed, you want to go 5 stops overexposed. Instead of a minus, it's just normal. So anyway, that's where it comes in. So I'm going to, again, in my CRS right here, and guys, nobody edits this way. Everybody edits inside of Camera Raw, but I just want you to understand what's really going on here so that you don't need to think about this anymore. You go, oh, of course, I get it. Or why did I lose all of my settings? Well, that's because you moved the raw file to some other hard drive and you didn't bring the XMP file along with it. If you brought the XMP file along with it, you would be fine. XMP and the raw data have to be in the same folder. If they're not in the same folder, then even though you have an XMP file for it, Photoshop doesn't know that, and it can't find it. No other program will either. So at any rate, like I say, I was just going to get rid of that -5, save the file, and now close it up. And now what I'm telling, the recipe now says, instead of 5 stops under, it says 5 stops over. So now if I double click on the CR2 file, it opens up and it's blown out because it's 5 stops over. And you can see it's a +5 in the exposure right here. I'm going to cancel out of here. We'll open that up one more time. Yes?
The XMP file comes with the raw file. What's that for?
The XMP, the minute you open a raw file, it generates an XMP file if you open it in an editor. So if you open it in Camera Raw, Lightroom, anything, it's going to generate an XMP file.
Okay, so it's nothing. I can just delete it.
You can delete it, but any changes, any processing that you've done, you're going to lose.
Okay.
So I'm going to show you that right now. I'm going to change this. I'm going to, again, I'm just going to now drag this XMP file onto the text editor because it gives me, I've got in my dock, it actually remembers the most recent applications that I've opened up. I'm going to set that XMP data back to, the exposure value back to 0. I'm also going to change the color temperature of this to 8600 and save that file. And close this up, double click on my CR2. And now you can see I've actually gone back to a normal exposure, those zeros, but I've got a color temperature now of 8600. It's just a list of the recipe that you're doing. And everything that you can do in here has got an entry in that. So it will remember your geometry settings. It will remember your color grading settings or your optic settings. It will remember every single thing that you do in here. So I'm going to hit cancel off of that, and again, show you one more time. If I throw my XMP data away, it no longer has a recipe to refer to, and now I'm going to double click on it, and it will just be the original way that I actually shot this. So it's a way to get back to how your file was originally shot. How many of you guys are working in Capture One? Hands up high. So in Capture One, you have the same thing, but they structure it in a different way. So you should know this just in case you want to migrate your stuff. So I'm going to go to a Capture One session. It doesn't matter which session that you've got. I just need to make sure I've got some captures in here. I do have some captures in here. But if you look inside a Capture One folder, if you scroll down to the very bottom of the captures, there is another Capture One folder. If you click on that and open it up, these settings right here, they don't call them XMP, they actually call them COS, Capture One settings. So, but these are XMP files as well. So again, if you were to throw this away, you would lose all the settings that you've done in Capture One. So if you've done a color balance in Capture One or an exposure change in Capture One or any of those things in Capture One, all of those are remembered in here. If you only give somebody your capture, the raw files, and you do not give them this folder, when they open that stuff up in Capture One, it will have no color balance, it'll have no exposure adjustment, anything that you've done in there. Cropping, all of that kind of stuff is memorized in this part. So it's just, and they do that, again, I think they have a little bit cleaner, more elegant version of this. So you can see it's all the raw files. Imagine if you had done all of these in Camera Raw, you would double the files that are in here. So and it just gets to be a lot of files. If you've got like 1,000 files, that kind of thing, it's just an issue here. Does that make sense to everyone? How many people in here are seriously working in Lightroom? Hold your hand up high, even though you should be slightly embarrassed to do, no, just kidding. Just not saying anything. So there's an issue with that. How many of you have ever had a corrupted database in Lightroom and had to rebuild it and lost all of your settings? You didn't have to rebuild it? Well, then it didn't get corrupted. Oh, yeah, but that's not the same thing. So in Lightroom, what happens is that Lightroom, the program itself, that was really the foundation of Lightroom, is that it's a database of all the XMP files. That's basically what it is. So if the database itself in Lightroom gets corrupted, you don't lose your raw files. Your raw files are fine. You don't lose any of that. You can create a brand new Lightroom catalog. You can import all of those files into your new Lightroom catalog, and you're fine. You'll be good to go, except you will have lost all of your color settings, all your keywording, all your tag ratings, all your anything. All of that's gone. You just get a brand new catalog that's got all the raw files in it. However, if you make one change in Lightroom, I'm going to show you this really quickly. We are really going tangent now, so sorry. It's just the nature of the beast. But this is important because if you're going to continue to do this work, I'm just going to show you how I would do it. So if you come up to your Lightroom, you don't need to open Lightroom to do this, but if you want to, so you can see where this is, up to Lightroom and come down to Preferences, and it's going to be in, I think, File Handling. Sorry, I'm going to just go through these really quickly. Should have been in there. Well, one other thing really quickly here, in terms of external editing, by default, this is where Lightroom also sets it up for your color space to be ProPhoto RGB and 16-bit. That's why if you bring your files directly from Photoshop into, from Lightroom into Photoshop, they come in ProPhoto RGB and 16-bit. You can change that using these drop-down menus. But now I need to find the XMP part. So hang on one second. This is where it should be. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Oh, maybe this. If you're actually trying to do this with me, up to Performance, come down to Catalog Settings and go to Catalog Settings. And this is where it is. In the Catalog Settings under Metadata, automatically write changes to XMP. If you click on that, anything that you do in Lightroom will be written out. It'll not only be remembered in the database in Lightroom, but it will also generate one of those XMP files for every one of your raw files that you work with. And that is actually stored along with your raw files. It's not in the database. So if the database is corrupted, you throw the database away, you create a new database, and you do an import. And because you have all of those XMP files written, all the changes, all the developing, all the keywording, the color coding, all of the star ratings, all of that comes into the new database. Yes?
Why didn't they tell us shit in Photo One?
Yeah. If I had $1 for every time I've heard that, I could retire.
I mean, I think I already have that set up, so I don't know where I work that.
It's in, if they follow the preferences that I wrote years ago, that's how it's set up. Can you start me a sign in? Okay, let's get back to the turn-in stuff. We haven't even scratched the surface about what we're trying to do here, so. I'm sorry, what?
It's too late for a singer already.
Well, no, again, you're getting it now. You're getting it now. That's all that matters. You're getting it now, right? Now, I get this stuff in all of my studio classes as well. Why didn't they ever tell me that? All right, sorry. Very long way to. Okay, so I feel like I've picked on Jared enough here. We're going to take a look at something else. I'm going to take a look at Michaela's really quick. No, I'm not. This is the shopping guide. Oh, yeah. This is weird, so I take that back. I am going to do this right here to begin with. So if we take a look at this, the way this whole image actually started out, if you want to turn, only look at one layer at a time, you hold the Option key and you hover over the eyeball and click, and it'll turn everybody else off. And you can actually see in this case, it's now, it's been just the wall detail is the only thing that's actually showing here. If you want to see the entire file the way it was processed, you hover over the mask, hold down the Shift key and click on that. It'll put a big red X on it, and then you'll actually see the image the way it was processed. So in this case, it looks like she processed a wall, and then she processed the hair, and then she processed an outfit, and then another outfit, or then basically just for the windows. So separating these four things into, or these four layers actually represent four different areas of the image. The problem that I have with this is that there's no real need for the mask on the bottom, and to show you what I mean by that, I'm going to turn all of this back on, and I'm going to leave it like here. The base that we're starting with here is the base. Everything else is sitting up on top of this. So if I have all of those on, I'm going to click to get rid of the base here really quickly, or just the mask part. I'm going to click on it, and you see it doesn't really change anything in here, because without it, the entire base shows a little bit of fringing because her masking here is not perfect around the edges of her. But it doesn't matter if the whole base is on, because all of the rest of the layers on top cover the entire rest of the image. Does that make sense, everyone? The other thing that I find is a problematic here, it's just a way of working. It's not a huge, it's just to think about a way of working. When you're thinking about dodging and burning, you want to start with a base that is as close to perfect as you can get it. You don't want to start with the base that's already the dark part, the burning part of your image. You would want, again, to start with as good as you can get so that you would then know what to dodge and burn on top of it. Make sense? So it's just a way of thinking about working here in that regard. So I just want to point that part out. I want to show Robin real quick. It's not all bad. I actually do show ones that I think are actually pretty well done. I think this one is pretty well done. It's interesting, though, because there are, as we go through the processing part of it, this is what the base starts like. So I'll just show you that one. Then the background got edited on top of this, so if you can actually see the difference in those two, it starts with the image pretty open for, again, for the outline for the figure, which is as it should be. Again, the figure in here is really the central element of this. It's the most important element of the image. So then background to make it darker on top of that. And then a curve got thrown in on top of this. And typically I would say, well, you should be able to just use, because the curve is now being applied to both of this. It's being applied to not only the figure, but also to the background as well. But if you don't want to go back in and readjust the settings in Camera Raw, then this curve can actually make sense right here because it's being applied to the entire thing. And then it looks like there's a final adjustment that's made on the face and hair to actually darken it back down. And then there's an overall levels change to everything. And if you can see, the levels changes, they're not radical, they're not extreme. Again, in a perfect world, you would not be doing this with curves and levels inside of Photoshop, because now you're working on essentially baked data. You would want to be probably doing it back in Camera Raw. But if you've gone through it and you've got this whole list of, you've got this whole litany of layers, and you want to make a change to the overall composite of all of those, opening up every single one of those layers in Camera Raw and adjusting the exposure by bringing it down 1/10 of a stop or whatever is a pain in the ass. So doing these overall level corrections or curve corrections on top of everything, whatever, makes sense to me. I'm not going to try to talk you out of that. I want to take a look at Caitlin's next. Again, I thought the overall result of this one was pretty well done, I think, now that I'm saying that. Yeah. But in this, you have got a lot of, and this is just something, again, this is a more advanced masking technique, so just to make you guys aware of what's going on here. If you take a look at these layer masks, you can see that the one up at the very top, the one here for the suit, is actually a pretty light gray on top of a white. And those things, you could make them mechanically, but what's really going on here is if you click on the layer mask, you can see there's a density adjustment up here for the layer mask itself. So watch what happens to this layer mask. Right now the density is set at 78%. If I crank it all the way up to 100%, it's a black and white mask like you would normally imagine this thing to be. So, but what gets confusing about this, so it's a way so here, basically what's going on. I'm going to start with the base layer here just by itself. If we go on and we actually put on, so you can see that this is an image that's now been developed darker, and the mask itself is completely white where her hair is. So if I turn this on and off, you can see it's a big adjustment increase on her hair. But because the layer mask has also got a density around it that's not black, this area around it's not black, you can see the density has been reduced to 86%. So it's a very dark gray, but it is not black. So part of the darkening of this is also happening on this background. So watch what happens if I turn this on and off. Look at the background itself, at the windows and at the wall. Part of it's hitting those as well. And if that's going to be the case, my question would be, why not just do the original image down the way it was? And then it gets even more complicated as we come up here, because now we've got two layers that are basically inverted from one another. So this image that's up on top now is actually designed to lighten everything up. The suit that she's wearing is being lightened considerably. The background a little bit, not so much. Do you see what's going on here? Again, if we take a look at the mask, I'm going to show you just the mask by itself. Because this background is not black, part of the processing of this is being applied to the background. So it's not like this is isolating and just impacting and making the suit that she's wearing lighter. It's also making part of this background lighter. So I've got layers here. This is actually making the background lighter, where this one right here, the layer just underneath it, is making the background darker. They are fighting each other. So anyway, I just wanted to point that part out. But again, I will say this. End of the day, if you look at the composite part of it all, it's actually very well done. So, you know, what can I tell you? Couple more to look at, guys, and then we're actually going to do this from top to bottom the way it actually should be done. I want to look at Evans next. Again, this goes back to those profile embedded warnings here and the fact that there's mismatching here. So in this one, when this whole thing starts out, and we'll have a conversation about this when we actually go to look at it and go through it, how to develop this kind of stuff, whatever. It starts out, in my opinion, already a little bit too dark, and then it actually starts to get darker. But what's weird about this is that this image right here, the second image right here, is identical to the one that's underneath it. So if we turn off, so the top one is turned off. If I hold down the Shift key and turn off the layer mask, there's no change here at all. So there's no reason for this image because it's not doing anything. And then finally, there's an overall one here on the top where it's actually darkening these shadows considerably more. So here is a quick trick. I'm going to show you guys how to do this. We will look at doing this together in just a little bit. I want to know how much underexposed this is. Would you guys look at this and agree that you think that this is underexposed, or you think this is correct? Underexposed, right? So how do we figure out how much? So this is the trick. I'm going to select I'll go ahead and turn on the mask. I'm going to select the very top layer. I need everybody to write this keyboard shortcut down. So find something to write on, because we're going to use this keyboard shortcut for the rest of your life. You're going to use it in this class a ton. You're going to use it. And it's a very complicated, again, I don't do many keyboard shortcuts. That's just not my thing. I don't have that kind of memory. But this is an important one for you guys to actually remember, because it will help you out to do stuff like I'm going to do right now. So the keyboard shortcut is hold down Command. If you're on Windows, it would be Control, the Option key, the Shift key, and hit the letter E. Again, it's the Command key, Option key. Are you on Mac or Windows? You're on Mac, right? Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. It does a merge stamp version of everything that is visible to your top layer. Now, you don't need to just watch. I'm going to throw this layer away and show you again another version of this. I'm going to turn off both layers right here, and I'm going to do that very same Command, Shift, E on this one. Command Option Shift E up on the top, and I'm not going to pick up anything for it. So let me see if I turn on this guy. Yeah, you'll see actually here, because I've got my base layer off, I've got this like weird holes that are actually happening in here. If you do the same thing, Command Option Shift and the letter E, you get those on the very top. It's a merge of anything that's visible. If something is not visible, this base is not visible, it does not become part of the merge stamp visible. That's what they call this. It's called a merge stamp visible. I'm going to turn the other one back on and do it again. Command Option Shift and the letter E, or Control Option Shift and the letter E. This is now a merge of everything. It's all been put together. So in this case here, I'll stay with this one. The next move I would make is turn this into a smart object so that I can use smart filters. So if you'll see, I can come up to my layer menu and come down and say convert to smart objects, smart object, convert to smart object, or because I'm going to use a filter on this, up to the filter menu down to convert for smart filters. Smart filters are filters that you use on smart objects. Again, remember, smart object is a protective envelope. You cannot destroy that image. You cannot harm that image as long as it's in the smart object. So this, I'm going to say convert for smart filters. It's going to say, okay, this is now a smart object. Now I can run a smart filter on it, and I'm going to go to the camera raw filter. Inside of the camera raw filter, I'm in camera right now. I'm going to zoom into this girl's face. Wow, what have I got that's lagging this computer so badly? Sorry, I'm just trying to free up some resources here because this seems horrendously slow. Oh, it's probably because Bridge is open. And Firefox is open. Okay. At any rate, I'm going to zoom in to this girl's forehead. So we're going to talk about color by the numbers here, especially about skin tones. So this applies, this is just a check when you're actually shooting for skin tones. So for exposure. We've already talked about if you have a color card in there that you want to white balance your color card and then measure the RGB readouts for the white patch. And what am I looking for those readouts to tell me? What numbers am I looking for perfect exposure? We talked about this. Remember, we looked at the card up on the wall and everybody said, okay, what values where we were really getting highlight detail? It was between 245 and 250. That's what we want. Unfortunately, in this image, I don't have a color card. So another check. This is a much rougher, this is not as exact, but you'll be shocked at how close you can actually get on it. Another way to check this is you want to look at a highlight, and I mean serious highlight, on Caucasian skin. This is the only thing it works on. This is not racial, it's simply the way it is. What you're looking for a highlight on Caucasian skin is in the red channel only between 225 and 245, and you should write that down. Every decent digital tech in the world knows this trick and uses it. So you say to yourself, well, I ain't got any white people on my set. Well, then you can't use this trick. Or the only person on my set that's white is the caterer. Grab the caterer and throw them in place of your subject matter, shoot a picture, and you'll be able to do this trick. But in this case, because this girl is Caucasian, we can actually do this on her. So I am going to put down a color sampler point. To get color sampler points in Camera Raw, it's on the lower right-hand corner of it. It's the little eyedropper that's got that sort of little icon next to it. If you click on that, you can actually lay down a sample. And again, I am looking right here. Let me zoom in even tighter on this so you can see this highlight that's on the side of her face? I could actually do a point right there. See the highlight that's on the bridge of her nose? I could go there. You do not want to go anywhere where there's shadow down in here. You also don't want to go anywhere where there might be makeup because that will actually skew your color readings. But I could conceivably go down here to her chin part down here. Again, you are looking for a highlight, not a shadow area. The brightest part of it is what you're really looking for. So I'm going to drop a point right there. And you can see my color readout that I get right here. It's got a 126 for my red channel. Remember, I said you want to be in a range of 225 to 245 for your red channel. My typical go-to is a 235. I shoot it right in the middle. So I'm just going to grab the exposure slider here and I'm going to drag this up until I read 235 on that part right there. And I'm going to take a look at this right now. I'm going to throw on my exposure warning to see. I'm starting to burn out the hair, but I would reprocess for the hair anyway. So I'm really going to say okay to this. And this tells me, again, I think this is a much closer exposure to what this should be. Wouldn't you guys agree with that? You'll see that I've also got a smart filter right down here. If you turn this off now, again, because it's a smart object, this is non-destructive. So now I've got smart filters that stay editable. So I can double click on this camera raw filter and go in and adjust that setting again if I feel like the need to do that. Makes sense? How many of you guys work with smart filters? Oh, this is a game changer, because look at the other thing you've got here. You've got a layer mask for it, a filter mask. So now you could actually filter other things around this if you didn't want this to be so blown out. So let's say really quickly, I want the girl to actually be, I want the background to be really dark and the girl to be really light. I'm just going to do a quick selection of the girl. I'm going to invert, nope, not yet. So rough selection, but you guys will get the point. I'm actually going to invert this selection. Don't worry, we'll go through all of this at some point. And on my layer mask with that active selection part going, I'm actually going to make I'm going to hide the background from it part. So I'm going to fill that with black. Command D to deselect. Again, I've got a mask for my filter on here. That's what's giving me this control here. Does that make sense? I can even get fun with it. I can hit a B key to get a brush and make it a larger brush. And I'm going to make white my foreground color, and I'm going to do a reverse vignette. So I'm actually going to paint up here, areas in here. Let's go to a soft brush to do it. Areas up into here that I want to make lighter. Again, I'm now painting with a filter. Make sense? Okay. Okay, we were going to do this thing from scratch. So I need everybody to close this up. We're going to take it from the very, very, very beginning. So if you can go to, so I want everybody, please, please, please do this with me. It's not going to be part of your homework, but these are the kind of things, if you go through the steps with me here, number one, you'll stay awake. Number two, you'll actually learn a whole lot more, because again, it's not just hearing it with your ears, it's actually doing it with your hands. And so again, I can't strongly encourage that part enough. If we go to our class number 2, oh, I know what I was going to show you as well. Well, it'll get into all of this part here. So into our week number 2, into the assignment folder. This assignment file came out of, I think, the 201000702 fashion. The last 2 digits are the 03 grouping. I think that's where this is from. And if we click on the frame 001, you'll actually see it's got the color card in it. And I've also got, in my case, do you have an XMP and a DNG in this thing as well, by any chance? Mm-hmm. You do? Yeah. Let's get rid of all of that. So get rid of the XMP. I'm going to get rid of the DNG and the other two, the other XMP and the other DNG. I want to start out with just this raw stuff. So all I've got now in here is 2 raw files. Are you guys good with that part? Mm-hmm. Okay, if you want, it's just going to make it simpler. The first thing I'm going to do is actually build a custom profile for this. So I'm going to open up frame 001. It will come into Photoshop. And again, I'm just going to click on the upper right-hand corner, the little square that's got the arrow pointing down in it, just to create a DNG version of this file so that I can build a custom profile. So I'm going to click on this. It will, if you've never changed anything in here, you don't need to change anything in here. It's going to put it in the same folder where the raw file actually came from. So it's going to be right next to it. It's good housekeeping, whatever. I'm just going to hit save. You'll see that there's a little scroll bar that goes down along the lower left-hand side of your image, indicating how long the process is taking. You can do this for 1,000 files at one time. It's going to take a long time to do it, but if you had a shooting that you were doing for, let's say you were out and you were shooting and you did 12, 15 shots, different lighting setups for that day, you could load all of your color card versions of that in once and generate DNG of all of them all at once. So it's just a time saver. In this case, I'm just going to hit done. It will close it up and I will go back into my folder. And I'm going to go back and you can see I've now got a DNG. I've also got an XMP file here. Now, I'm not worried about the XMP, but just because I opened it and actually did anything and then closed it up, it generates an XMP file for it. But the DNG is why I was really in there. That's what I really cared about. Then I'm going to go to my application folder. You guys this is the homework that you did before. And I'm going to look for the color calibration, the color checker camera calibration app. I'm going to double click on that. Again, this is exactly the process that you guys did before. It's going to warn me about calibrating my monitor. It's actually also warning me about calibrating that projector. That's just how important that stuff is. With this calibration software open now, you need to go back and find your DNG and simply grab the DNG and drag and drop it onto the window of the color checker camera calibration software. If for some reason you can't get your screens next to each other or whatever, there's just a problem doing the drag and drop, you can always come up to the file menu and come down to add image and then just navigate to the image and you'll be fine to go. So this is now giving me my, it found the target, which is great. But before I actually continue with this, I'm going to go back into my Finder or my desktop. I just need to copy the name of this. Again, a couple of you guys use the naming convention for your assignments, which was okay-ish because that's what I told you, that's how all your assignments needed to be named. However, if you had really read the assignment, it would tell you specifically that you want to name this profile after the shooting, because most of you got this part right, is that there were 4 different profiles for the 4 different shootings that you did. Some of you actually used this profile from this shooting on a different image. Some of you used a profile that we did of the girl in the purple sweater in the park for one of these shootings, and they were completely unrelated. They weren't even the same camera. So the reason we name our profiles after the shooting is so that we say, oh, okay, what profile do I use for this? Well, the name of the shooting in the file is exactly the same as the name of the profile, and you can't mix that up. Make sense? Okay. So I'm going to simply click once. Again, this is on a Macintosh. It just selects the name without the DNG setting on the end. Command C will copy that, or up to the edit menu down to copy. We're just copying the name. That's all we're doing. Coming back into our DNG, our color checker camera calibration software, and say create profile. It's going to offer to name it Canon EOS 5D Mark II. That's meaningless to us. I don't know what 5D Mark II that is. I'm going to swipe across the name and try to keep the .dcp extension, but if I can't keep it, I can just add it later. And then again, you would think that you could just hit Command V or Control V if you're on Windows. That doesn't work. If you hit the delete key or the backspace key on Windows, you'll get rid of that name, and then you need to do a right click on this. So if you're on a Windows machine and you can do a right click because Windows is built that way, you're fine. If you're on a Macintosh, you can do a control click and you should get a drop down menu. I'm not getting a drop down menu, so let me see again. Yep, so finally I get a drop down menu. And in that drop-down menu, you should have paste. Also on a Macintosh, you can do two-finger swipe on your trackpad is also a right click. You will get a drop-down menu, and I can go ahead and say I want to paste this in. I'm missing the dot now between the 001. I also don't need this 001 because that's actually a frame number. What I need is the 03. That 03 is my shot number. So I'm going to get rid of the frame number and then just put a dot in because the dot signifies that DCP is extension. It is going in my camera profiles folder. This is exactly where I want it, so you can see if you use your drop-down menu where it's actually going. I'm going to say fine to that, and I'm going to hit save. We'll get through this, guys, and take a break. So it says the profile has been created successfully, and I'm going to say OK to that, and then I'm going to quit the color checker calibration software. It's actually done its job. However, now we're back to our situation right here. I have got a DNG. The problem with this DNG, though, is it's got the profile that was originally embedded in it. If you double-click on this to open it up, you're in Camera Raw. It had Camera Standard as the embedded profile. I can change that now, but that change will not re-embed. It will know in its own XMP data that I've made a change, but it will not physically embed that profile, which is what I need to do in order to take this file to somebody else's machine that does not have this profile in it. Does that make sense to everyone? This Camera Standard is the embedded profile for this. So even if I change this right now and pick the custom profile that I just made, and if I take this to somebody else's machine, it will actually say we cannot find it because this Camera Standard was the one that was embedded to begin with. Yes? It doesn't matter. Yeah, some will say Adobe Color, some will say Camera Standard. That part doesn't. It's what Adobe thinks it should be, and depending on your version of Camera Raw, this changes. So I'm going to hit cancel on this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back into my Finder right here. You need to throw this thing away. You need to get rid of the DNG that you used to make this. So I'm going to throw it into the trash. I'm going to then double click on my CR2 file, the raw file again. And at this point now, all the stuff that I'm going to do now will get built into this profile. Do not do color balancing at this point. We just want the base. Again, the color can actually, the color card itself can actually change. So I'm not going to make that setting, but I am going to change my profile. I'm going to click on, I like to use the browser for this. So you can click on the drop-down menu here and you can come down and actually say browse, or I just click on the icon that's to the right of the profile setting. It'll open up stuff. The drop-down menu that you're looking for is profiles. If you open that up, the profile, the custom one that we just built, should be there. Click on that. You will actually then click on the back button up at the top and see that your profile, the correct one, has now been applied to this CR2 copy of the raw file. Now generate a DNG from here, because now the custom profile that we just built will be the one that gets embedded. And no matter whose machine this goes to, that will actually be there. Make sense? So I'm going to go ahead and say create DNG for this. Hit save again. Then hit done again. That part's actually been created now, and we are good to go on this. So now I've got the DNG is sitting right here. I want to actually do this now for my other CR2 file, but the other CR2 file does not have a color card in it. And we need that to be the base of this. So select the DNG that you just made. Hold down the command key or whatever you use to make discontinuous selections. So I'm going to open the DNG and I'm going to open the CR2 at the same time. on my DNG, the one that's actually got the color profile already assigned to it, I can now, at this stage of the game, do my color balance, my white balance. So I'm going to click on the eyedropper. I'm going to zoom in to my color card. I'm going to, sometimes the eyedropper gets really wonky when you, zoom in and zoom out. So you have to sometimes go back, it's a bug. You have to go back every now and then and click on the eyedropper to get it actually active. I'm going to use the white patch that's right next to the red. I'm going to click on that. This has now got color balance, and it's also got this DNG profile in it. Go over to your thumbnails now. If you hover over the thumbnail, you'll actually see you get 3 little lines that run across the, or there's 2 icons that come up. One has got 3 little dots. You want to click on those 3 little dots. You'll get a flyout menu, and you want to do a select all. You'll notice that it puts another border around the image that does not have the color card in it.
First, if you did start on with the color box, did you choose a color?
Yeah, I did. I choose just the gray that's right next to the red.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you do next?
Now you hover over your icon, and you'll get the little 3 dots. Click on that, and do a select all. And then you'll notice it puts a gray border around the other image that doesn't have anything in it. Go back up to those 3 little dots again, come down, and you want to do sync settings. And when you do that, it's going to come up and it's going to say, they have selections, collections of these, whatever. In most cases, the only thing that gets weird about doing syncing is that if you've actually done a custom crop in here, most people don't want to sync cropping. So this would allow you to uncheck cropping. But in our case, I'm going to leave it at its defaults. You could pick all as well. That part doesn't matter. You'll see that it's selecting everything in here, and I'm just going to go OK. Now what has happened is if you now click on the image that does not have the card in it, you will notice it has got a custom profile that is embedded in it, or that's labeled for it, and also its custom white balance. This is now as perfect a starting color as I can possibly get. Now, this does not mean, you could say to me, well, Verser, I really like my images warm. I have no problem with that, but this gets you back to base, to normal. Why is this important? How many people in here do compositing work? Not that many. Okay, well, one of the biggest problems in doing compositing work is if let's say you're pulling in 4 or 5 different images from different places and they all have their own color balance to them. It becomes a nightmare. You start to you've got a background, fine. You bring in a figure, you've got to change the color balance of the figure to fit the background. Then you bring in another figure, you got to change the color balance to fit the first person and the background. I mean, it's just a nightmare. You start to tear your hair out, and then all of a sudden you pull in a car, and you got to color balance that, right? If you do all of your color balancing to neutral, you can bring all of them together. They will all fit. They will all be exactly the same color balance. And then once you create your composite, you can color grade it and make it warmer, bluer, darker, lighter, whatever. But this is a fast way to get your color all equal among all the components that you're using in your compositing. Make sense? So I'm not trying to say this is the end color, but I am saying it should be the beginning. We good? Okay, I now need to make a DNG of this in order to embed that into the profile as then a place for me to start. So to do that, I'm fairly certain you can just hover over the thumbnail of this. You get that same icon that's got the square with a little arrow pointing down. If you click on that, you get this same option to come up here. I'm going to click on Save for that. It's going to go through the whole process. I'm going to say Done, and then go back. This DNG that I've just made of the image of the girl without the color, without the bag, who's got the shopping bag, but without the color card, this is the base of the image that we are now going to make because this has got the color profile embedded in it. So this is where I'm going to start creating my Photoshop file. Everybody good on that part? So again, if you double click on the DNG now, it will come into Camera Raw. This has now got an embedded profile and it's also color balanced. And this is where we start. So, a couple things to actually look around about this. If we had looked at the color card, well here, you don't need to do this. Stay where you are right here. I'm going to show you the color card that I actually used to do all of this. So this color card, if I take a look now, zoom in, and I hover over the white patch right here, you can see that I get in my white value right here, I'm getting a 235, a 235, and a 234. However, if you take a look at what's going on to the guy right here in his shirt, I've got my highlight warning on. I'm burning out parts of this highlight in the shirt. 245 to 250 would be ideal for me on this card. However, if you're in a contrasty lighting situation like this, then your subject starts to overtake the value of your card. Your subject becomes more important than your card. So for instance, one of the classic things that happens with this color card situation is that you'll have a person in a white t-shirt and a color card in front of it, and you look at the color card values and you get 235, 235, 235, but you look at the shirt and you get 245, 245, 245. The shirt becomes your new white patch. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is the amount that's burning out. You can see his cuffs are beginning to burn out, her hair's beginning to burn out. I'm okay with those parts. But I know I can't drive this to 245 in here. So I am okay with the exposure setting in this. Make sense? One of the things that you should know about any files that you work with me is that the exposure is pretty damn perfect when you get it. So don't go in here and knock 2 stops off of this thing and thinking that your version of this is going to look better. Artistically, it may be what you want to do, and I'm fine with that. You can argue that too, and I'm fine with that. But from a normal point of view, this is as close to perfect exposure as we're actually going to get. I'm going to cancel out of here and open up that DNG again. So hopefully you've opened up the new DNG of the girl that does not have the color card in it, but has got the shopping bag in it. So I've got the highlights where they should actually be. That is controlled by exposure, but now I need to actually check on my shadow detail. So I'm going to zoom into this part of her arm over here. We went through this before as well. Remember, we had that a print that was up on the wall, and we all decided what value was our highlight detail and what value was our shadow detail. Do you guys remember the value for shadow detail?
25.
Exactly, it was in the 25s, right? So what should be shadow detail here? If you take a look, let me show you here really quickly. If we take a look down here, you see her cuff right down here. If you actually measure the inside of that cuff, it should be black. You should not have shadow detail there. It's a really high contrasty situation, and if you take a look at your readout in the histogram right here, you'll see it's in the it's right around the 10s. It was an 11, 9, and an 8. That averages out to a 10. There's no detail in that, and there shouldn't be. So the trick to this is becoming what should really have shadow detail. And when we mean shadow detail, again, remember when we were looking at that patch on the wall, it was like, okay, I need something that, there needs to be real evident detail here. Not, okay, yeah, if I squint really hard and put a high-powered laser light on it, I'll be able to see that detail. It's not that. It's being able to sit here, look at a print on a wall and say, yeah, I can see the detail in that. So if you look at the area that's up by her armpit, this area right in here, this will kind of give you the ranges that we're talking about. You can see that there is a sort of a triangle shape area in here. If we hover over this again, you can see it's even darker than that area was inside of her sleeve. That should be black. That should not have shadow detail in it. If you open this up to have shadow detail in it, your print is going to look completely washed out. Your screen is going to look completely washed out. That is not where we want complete shadow detail. I mean, think about the lighting in this. It's backlit, so this is in complete shadow. There's a fold that is actually covering it that's killing any ambient light that's coming from the sky in front of her. That's not where shadow detail should be. But the area right next to it, you should. See the stitching that's happening in that area right in there? You want to be able to see that stitching. That is shadow detail. If you hover over that, look at your numbers, and what do you get up here? 25, 22, 24. Fucking perfect exposure. If it wasn't, let's say this was too dark, you would actually click on the eyedropper, you would come over to this area, drop down another color point that's giving you a readout here, and you would then lift your shadows by clicking on the shadow slider and pushing them forward. You're seeing I'm opening them up right now. However, It was exactly the number that I actually needed. It's right here in those close to 25s. So I don't need to screw with this at all. One last thing to check my exposure is I'm going to hover over that highlight that is on her face. And again, I'm reading my color readout that's sitting up here on the top, and I'm reading a 226 is in the R channel. Is that in my range? It is in my range, but I've already told you guys, I like a little bit hotter image here. I like it to be closer to 230, 235, whatever. So I'm going to click on this to put another color sampler down, and I'm going to push the exposure up slightly to see if I can't get to that. I don't want to hit it too hard because there's a lot already burning out in here. So I'm going to settle with a 232 up on that. Again, I've still got my points here for my number 1 point, which is my shadow detail happening right here. I can now pull my shadows down a little bit because they're a little bit too hot because I pushed my exposure. So I'm basically pulling this. I'm adding contrast in here. So I'm going to go back to my shadow slider. Instead of opening them up, I'm actually going to choke them back down. And you can see it's a slight adjustment. It's a -6 in here. Gets me maybe a -7 will actually get me a little bit closer. This is how you process your files. All the shit where you are looking at these screens that are lying to you and you're believing this stuff, this is a myth. Yes?
Why did you adjust the exposure instead of highlight?
Because typically for me, I like my highlight on Caucasian skin, the highlight part, to be around 235 in the red channel. And that's what I've got right here. I got a 231.
But why didn't you adjust the highlights only?
Oh, I could have done the highlights only.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything in Photoshop. There's a million ways that you could actually do it. I like working with exposure overall because I think it probably is going to help the rest of the image as well. So it's going to lift the midtone some. Everything will be a little bit brighter. So I'm going to zip back out. And this is where my image is right now. If we can take a look at the before and the after, and the before and the after, and I'm happy with where that ultimately ended up. So this is how I'm going to start. I am going to open this up as a smart object. I am going to then save this file right now. And again, this is not going to be your homework, but you can just, I'm going to save it. Oh, come on. And I'm going to throw it into my TOS partition. It is going to be a Photoshop file. I'm going to go ahead and save. Again, in your case, you should be saving as either Photoshop or TIFF, either one. They're pretty much interchangeable. And now I can start to work on the rest of the image to actually make it whatever I ultimately want it to be. However, and this is something that's interesting to you guys, pretty much everybody looks at this image and thinks about dodging and burning. And what do you initially think of? And unfortunately, again, I don't know where well, I do know where you've learned all this, or most of this, is that everybody's temptation is to push everything to the midtones. So everybody looks at this image and says, okay, I need to make the wall in the background darker, I need to make the bag darker, I need to make the windows, lighter. I mean, what's this up with flattening out your image and just pushing everything to the midtones? This is now an artistic decision that you make. I want this image, the girl's the most important part about this. I want her to pop. When I look at this, there's a conflicting area here. She's not the same tone as the background, but if you look at those windows, the windows are in mid-tone. She's sort of where she needs to be. Is this sort of making sense, what I'm talking about, the trouble that I'm having with this? I'm going to do the exact opposite. Instead of making all the background darker, I'm actually going to make it lighter so that she pops off of it. This should now be decisions that you are making based on your artistic intent, not on, okay, well, it's a white bag, it means I need to burn it. Oh, it's a dark background, it means I need to dodge it. Make sense? So, to do that, I am going to do this actually using, again, I'm going to reprocess this. So to do it, I need to make another copy of this smart object. You cannot just do Command-J or drag it down to this little icon. You have to go up to Image, Layer, down to Smart Objects, New Object, Smart Object via Copy. You guys were the first class that got that right. On every single person in this room got that part of the assignment right, and I can't thank you enough. No, I mean, shit like that just makes me deliriously happy. It was like, my God, they really listened and they really followed. Yeah, so anyway, thank you for that. I'm going to double click on this just to open it back up into Camera Raw. This is my new version right now. And I'm just really going to crank the exposure up. Again, the unfortunate thing about doing it this way is it's really difficult to see what's going on at the same time. So I'm going to blow it out pretty good right here. However, I'm really blowing out the hair. Again, I'm going to mask that out. I'm not worried about that. But I want to bring the highlights that I'm really blowing out back on the wall. I don't want that to go to page white, and it pretty much has gone to page white. So I'm going to go up 2 stops in exposure. We'll see. Then I'm going to grab my highlights, and I'm going to try to recover them. And I can. So just pull those down a little bit. So I've brought the highlight part back in. Again, I'm not going to try to use this to actually take care of her hair. I'm going to mask her completely out. So that seems pretty good to me right there. And I'm going to say OK to this. We're almost done, guys. Now I want to make a selection of the girl. The problem is that I've got right now is that most of the girl, certainly her hair and her face, are so close to being blown out. It's going to be really hard to find an edge there. So I am going to turn off the Smart Object and actually work with the version that's underneath it, because I've actually got more separation that's actually happening here. I showed you this last week, and it's interesting about where you can actually have Photoshop select the subject locally via your computer, or send your image up to Adobe. So we're going to see both of those right now. You need to select any of the selection tools. So I'm just going to click on the quick selection tool, and you will see that there is a select subject button. Again, we could use quick mask on this, but we'll see how this works. There is a drop down menu, and by default this is set to actually do select subject on your device as opposed to up in the cloud. Everybody thinks that the cloud version is better. When I looked at the version of the hair knockout that we did last week, the cloud version was so much worse than the local version, you can't believe it. If I have a chance to it, I'll show you that today. So it's not that one's better than the other. You pretty much got to try both. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with the device results right now, meaning I'm going to do it on my computer, and I'm going to just click Select Subject. And it gives me a reasonably good outline. It doesn't bring the bag into this. I'm okay with that right now, because I could always add the bag to my layer mask later if that's what I want to do. So I'm going to save this selection just so that I can compare the device version with the uploaded to Adobe version. So I'm going to click on the select menu and come down to Save Selection, and I'm going to call this Device Selection and say OK. Command D to deselect, and then I'm going to use that drop down menu again to go to Cloud and hit Select Subject again. What did I do? What? I just did Save Selection and then named it Device Selection. Did you find Save Selection? Select menu? So this is now what Adobe thinks it should be, or what the cloud version thinks it should be, and this one actually did include the bag. So I'm going to save it as well, up to the Select menu, down to Save Selection, and call it Adobe Select. And say OK. Command D to deselect, and then you've got both of them. There are alpha channels that are sitting at the very bottom of your channels palette. I'm simply going to click on the device one and take a look. I can see there's a couple of holes in here, but I'm really interested in what it did with her hair. It looks like it got a pretty good feathery selection of her hair. Again, it's missing the bag. And then I'm going to click on the Adobe selection. And the Adobe selection actually does, in this case, look better. It's actually got a little bit more feathery hair in there. It's respected that hole in her arm right there. It actually got that part pretty well. So the Adobe selection is the one that I'm going to use as my mask. So I'm going to scroll up to the top of my channels palette. I'm going to select RGB so that, again, I'm back to my normal image. I'm going to scroll down so that I can see the Adobe Select, but you do not want to pick the channel. You just want to hover your cursor over the thumbnail. I'm going to say this 100,000 times. People are still going to pick the channel. Don't pick the channel. I mean, it's not going to be the end of the world, but you don't need to pick the channel. You just need to hover your cursor over the thumbnail. Hold down the Command key, Control key if you're on Windows. You'll see that the the little hand icon now gets the marching ants around it. Click on it, it will actually load that as a selection. Come back to the blown out smart object, and then we are going to turn this eyeball on, and I'm simply going to add this as a layer mask. Now in this case, what you'll see is, and it just ends up being the way I always work, the mask is inverted. What's happening right now is that the really blown out version is being on the girl and the background is not being done at all. So you simply need to invert the mask, Command I. And now I've got my subject is actually highlighted and silhouetted against this background. Isn't this a much more compelling image to actually start with than all the other, let's push it all to the midtones and right? So then, yes? Well, hang on, because I'll be right there, because we're going to take a break right now, and I'll be right there, and I'll get you back through that. However, the problem that we have with all of this is that it's really hard to see. When I did that two-stop over, I was just guessing. It's really hard to see because I don't have the context of the figure that's not being blown out here. So you have two options. The first option is that if you feel like this is too strong, you could double-click and go back into. I could double-click and go back in here, and I could say, oh, okay, well, two stops was too strong, and you could drag it down to whatever. That takes too long. Don't do that. Instead, you simply take the opacity slider of this top layer, hover over it, and hopefully you will get the scrubby slider, and just click on it and drop the opacity down till it matches what you want. If you take the opacity all the way down to 0, you basically turn the layer off. So this allows you to fine-tune it. And you say, oh, okay, yeah, that's where I want it. Although I think actually the two stops over looks great. Questions about this? So now you've actually got a file that's processed correctly, that's got your artistic bent on it, that's actually still got your raw data embedded in it, that's got the profile embedded in it. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. This is pro level. One final thing we're going to do. Zoom into this girl's face. And this is color correction by the numbers. So this is, you're going to have to write this down. Again, I swear to God, we're almost done. I firmly believe everybody in this room is 50 times smarter than the people in this fucking place give you credit for. This is not too much. I know this is not too much. It seems like a lot, though. Yeah, right? I know. So here it is. I'm going to show this. You won't see this on the screen, but you will hear the video. You will hear the audio, but I need to show you back here on this board. So it's the ratio of color in skin tones. And it's complicated because you can't use RGB to do it. You have to use CMYK to do it. This is an old trick that comes from people who did drum scanning. You can still get stuff drum scanned today, but it's becoming, unfortunately, a lost art. But the people who did drum scanning stuff, because it was all destined for print, all the software for drum scanners were always designed to operate in CMYK. And hopefully this is going to be a good pen. So the value for CMYK, this is going to be for a range of skin tones. I'll tell you where the caveats are. This should hopefully go pretty quick. So I'm going to do CMYK. And I do this all the time. I actually write this out on a piece of paper when I'm going to design this. So we're going to start with Caucasian skin. This girl will be a perfect example. In Caucasian skin, you do not want any K at all. If you have K, because K is black ink, it's dirty skin. It means you're underexposed. You need to lift your exposure. It's got nothing to do with color balancing. You need to lift your exposure till you get rid of any K that's actually in there. M will always equal M. M is your base point. That's where you're starting from. So M you want basically unchanged. Because what we're going to do is do ratios of M to C and also to Y. So C equals 1/5 to 1/3 M. Y equals M up to M plus 50% M. So I know that sounds really confusing right now. It's a whole lot easier than it looks. So we're going to do this image right here. C, M, Y, and K. So the point that you need to look on your image, you do not want to deal with anything. Again, you can see that this girl has got makeup on her cheeks. That will actually pervert your numbers. You don't want to do that. So I stick away from the deep shadows. I would avoid this area over here. You want to pick a pair of, you don't want to go super highlighty either. You want to pick a sort of a general area of color. So I'm going to do like her forehead up here. Seems to be a good place to do it. There's other places you could try. You could try like down here on her neck, possibly right into here. You can actually do hands as well, although the thing that you need to worry about all of those is a lot of times they will actually be, hands will be sunburned. They'll have more sun than the rest of a body will actually have. So I'm going to pick a spot that's right up here, and I'm going to go like this spot right here, this sort of like right here on her forehead. So I am going to grab a color sampler tool. I'm going to drop it on her forehead right here. Remember we talked about the averages that you use for your color sampler points? You do not want this to be a point sample. You want this to be a 3x3 or a 5x5. I'm going to do a 5x5 because I really don't want this to have landed on a single pixel that might be an anomaly. I want this to be an average range of this. So if you do a 5x5, what it's looking at is a square of pixels that are 5 wide and 5 tall, and it averages all of those together. And that's going to give me a good number in here. So this is my number one readout. I'm going to click on the drop-down menu and change this from RGB to CMYK. And now I'm getting a readout in CMYK. And you can see that I'm starting off here. Let me write these numbers down really quickly, and I'm going to take it back to the board. So I've got 8, 31, and 33. Okay. So where I'm at right now is I've got a magenta value of 31. C should equal 1/5 to 1/3 of that. 5 into 31 basically is 6. 3 into 31 is basically 10. So my range for C is somewhere from 6 to 10. I'm an 8. I'm right in the middle. I'm right where I should be. My yellow value should equal M, so it should be in a range. The range here should be 31, which is what my M value is, all the way up to 31 plus 50% of M, so roughly 15 on top of that. My range is 31 to 45. Does that make sense? And my K is at 0. It's exactly where I want to be. I am deficient now, I think, on that 31, because I'm reading here. Actually, it's a 33, so the yellow value is actually good enough here. However, if you want to go into Asian skin tone, you need to lift the yellow content. If you also want warmer Caucasian, you lift the yellow content. So to do that, you actually put a curve on the very top of this. In your curve, again, you have RGB. RGBs are the opposites of CMY. So if we want to boost the yellow, the opposite of yellow, the complement of yellow is blue. We need to decrease the blue. So to do that, you select the blue curve. You use the targeting adjustment tool, the hand here that's got the little double arrow on it. You click on that, come over right onto your point, and click, and if you start to pull down, you are you're decreasing the blue, which increases the yellow. Look at the yellow value right here. This would be the max of my range that I could go up to. So again, because I've got now 45 is my percentage of my yellow. I think that's far too strong, so I'm going to push this back and look at maybe a 36, maybe a little bit hotter here. Again, depends on the color calibration of your skin. Around a 40 here, we'll take a look and see if we like that part better. Yeah, it just seems a little bit more sunnier, brighter, healthier, you know, in that whatever way. Does this make sense, what we're doing here? And this is my final image. Yeah. Questions? So For African American skin, it's tricky because African American skin can go with such an incredible range of tone. However, these relationships stay the same. It's still this CMYK relationship, but then you start to bring K into it to make skin darker. And then it's, again, the range can be so extreme, that's not really a number that I can actually give you. As we get later into the course, I will actually give you color swatches that'll actually give you samples of skin tone that you can actually try to match. But that's basically, this still same relationship exists no matter whose skin basically you're talking about. Make sense? All right. I've got quarter till. Does it seem about that? Yeah, close enough, right? Can we do a really, let's make this a hard 15 and be back at 3? Are you guys good? Are there any questions about this? Yes?
I just want to do it, first.
Okay.
Because
All right.
got lost the whole-
That's fine. That's fine.
Oh, after you're done with her.
Well, why don't we do it together? Or you can look at what I do with her, and then I'll do it with you, and she can look at yours as well. How's that?